Hi there, my name is Missy Owen and I'm the Executive Clinical Director with Kaleidoscope Interventions, Puzzlebox Academy. Hope everyone had a great winter break. As we come back, we're getting into our first parent training. So for the first topic for the year 2024, I have chosen Defiant Behaviors. As we know, all children, all people engage in defiant behaviors throughout the day, but it seems to be this day and age, the defiant behaviors kiddos are engaging in are kind of taking it to that next level compared to what we've seen before. You know, if you look on any type of education chat room, if you ask a teacher, their main concerns these days are those defiant behaviors that these kiddos are engaging in. So that's across all types of kiddos, not just our specific type of kiddos on the autism spectrum, but all kiddos in general. So for this presentation, I'm really going to dive into different types of diagnoses that are typically given for defiant behaviors. And the second part of it, I'm really going to focus on a newer diagnosis that's come out, PDA, pathological demand avoidance. So this is something that started over actually in Europe a few years ago, and is slowly starting to come to America with actual diagnosis given of PDA. So one of the main things that separates PDA from the other types of defiant diagnosis, such as ODD, conduct disorders, impulse control disorders, PDA actually falls under that umbrella of autism spectrum. So like I said, we're about to jump in, and I hope you guys enjoy. So when we talk about defiant behaviors, what does that mean exactly? What it comes down to is going to be that control. A lot of the defiant behaviors often come out at times where the kiddos feel like they are not in control of that situation, which in general, being a kid, there is limited opportunity to have control over things. You know, you don't have a job, you don't have money, you don't have a car, you have to go to school, you have to do all these certain things. So there is, just by the nature of being a kid, limited control that you do get. But with our defiant kiddos, control is so important to them, and they often will go to extreme lengths to try to get that control back when they feel like they're in situations that they're not in control of. Especially in a classroom situation, I mean, that's where going to be one of the main situations that we do see these defiant behaviors come out. Because as we know, in a classroom, there's certain educational laws that have to be followed. The teacher's the one in control. There's other kids to compete with their own needs that need to be met. So definitely control is an important thing for our kiddos. So defiance can be basically saying no after demands placed, not doing the demand, always talking back, arguing, having a comment to make every time you ask them to do something. Hey, Johnny, can you pick up the pen? No, I don't want to pick up the pen. I'll do it later. Or something like that. Or it could be you ask them to do something, they say no, but as they're still doing it. If you look up the technical definition of defiance, you'll see the words such as open resistance and bold disobedience. Because that's oftentimes with defiance, the kids, they're letting us know that they're actively not doing what we're asking them to do or what they're not supposed to do. Which is interesting compared to other behaviors that may be more covert in nature. Definitely defiance, that is an overt behavior. You're going to be able to see it. When you do see it, you do know what it is. And that can even be to the extent of intentionally doing something the wrong way. If you know when you go to the sink to wash your hands, you put your hand under the soap and you intentionally let the soap spray all over the bathroom and then just walk away like, too bad, not my problem. Definitely defiance, it can look so many different ways, but you know it when you see it typically. So I'm just going to quickly touch base on different diagnoses that are associated with the behavior of defiance. Please know I am not a person who actually is able to diagnose these, so it's just very basic definitions of them just to give a very general overview of the different type of diagnoses. But like I said, later in the presentation, we're going to dive more into that PDA, the last one. So with that, we do have ODD, that's going to be Oppositional Defiant Disorder, CD, Conduct Disorder, Intermittent Explosive Disorder, Impulse Control Disorders, and then that last one, PDA, Pathological Demand Avoidance. The next slides, we'll get into a little bit more detail into some of those, but like I said, it's going to be very general, just getting out the surface levels. So the first one we're going to talk about is Oppositional Defiant Disorder. So this one is often diagnosed prior to getting the diagnosis of a conduct disorder. So with oppositional defiant disorder, as you can see, this is taken from the DSM, what their criteria is for diagnosing it. So that's going to be a pattern of the angry, irritable mood, argumentative defiant behavior lasting at least 6 months. That's going to be a common theme with a lot of these diagnoses, is that the behaviors, it's not just a one-off event. It has to be something that's persistent, that maintains over time. We see those consistent patterns of behavior. That is to the level that it impedes their ability to interact socially with others, academically with others. And maybe these kiddos that get kicked out of school, that are constantly getting suspended, getting expelled, getting into fights at home, that just won't listen, that may always get into fights with their other siblings. And with that being noted, that these behaviors, as I said, they happen throughout the lifespan, and not just during like maybe a psychotic episode, if there was maybe a medication change going on. The next one I'm going to talk about is conduct disorders. So conduct disorders is a diagnosis that's typically given after a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder has already been given. So this is something ODD can turn into CD. So with that conduct disorder, it's typically more intense behaviors that impact life more than the ODD ones do. So with that, we're looking at aggression towards others, both adults and peers, animals as well included in that one, destruction of property, that deception, the lying, the stealing, serious violation of rules. With this soup, the kiddos, they can typically be very manipulative. Maybe that we have an older kiddo who talks a younger kiddo into blatantly breaking the rules, getting in trouble, just to serve the purpose of the older kiddo. And with that, it's a lot of those red flags and kind of those warning signs that if we see these behaviors now and we don't get them under control, it can very easily turn into issues with the law, maybe juvenile detention down the road. Another diagnosis associated with defiant behaviors is going to be that intermittent explosive disorder. So with this, it differs from ODD and CD in that it's not a consistent pattern of behavior. That's where that word intermittent comes from. It happens randomly at times, it appears. As it says, the behaviors can last up to 30 minutes, but when they do happen, it's intense. There may be no clear warning sign to it, and that you're just sitting there one day in class doing your work, and then next thing we know, the desk is flipped. You're trying to stab the teacher with a pencil, and response team is being called into block. So with this diagnosis, we often see the behaviors of temper tantrums, triads, those heated arguments, a lot of shouting, physical aggression, threatening, assaulting others. So it does have some in common with the ODD and CD, but just the main difference is going to be with the intermittent explosive disorder is that it's not consistent. When it does happen, it's intense, but then you can go weeks without seeing any signs of these behaviors. And so the last one I'm going to talk about before we jump into the PDA is going to be the impulse control disorder. So that it is what the name says it is that these kiddos lack the ability to control their impulses. They think something, they do it. Whether that is, say, making an inappropriate statement, telling a funny joke, laughing at an inappropriate time, or to the other extreme of, hitting someone, throwing something. You often see sometimes with these kiddos, they'll do something, and then once they do it, they're almost in shock at the fact that they did do it. That's just that impulse control, and then once they do the behavior, you may see that remorse or regret after it's happened. And then this slide too, I do have some statistics in there. So you see at the bottom, the oppositional defiant disorder, the conduct, and intermittent explosive, those are the percentage of kiddos currently diagnosed with those disorders. So as you see, oppositional defiant is about 3.3%, conduct 4%, and then intermittent explosive 2.7%. So overall, it is low rates of diagnoses for these behaviors, but oftentimes as well, these diagnoses are compounded and have other diagnoses associated with them, such as autism and ADHD as well. So before we jump into PDA, I just want to quickly touch base on what is the cause of these defiant behaviors, of these diagnoses that we have, the ODD, the CD, intermittent explosive, the conduct disorders. So with that, it's very similar to autism in that there is no clear test for it. There is no clear causality to if you have this genetic factor in this environment, you will have this diagnosis. It's going to be that combination of genetic, biological factors, paired with those environmental variables that bring on the behaviors that we see. Based on the behaviors we see, you then get the diagnosis after, which we know is very similar to autism. A lot of the diagnosis testing for these are a lot of the parental reports, teacher reports, based on the behaviors we can observe. So now we're going to talk about PDA. So that's going to be that pathological demand avoidance. As I said previously, this is probably the newest diagnosis within the realm of autism and defiant behaviors, and those type of things. As I said, it has started over in Europe and England, and now has slowly come to America, with kids here that I know of actually receiving this diagnosis. So the pathological demand avoidance does differ from the ODDs, the CDs, those impulse control, from the previous diagnosis I spoke of. Specific to PDA, it does fall under that umbrella of the autism spectrum. So oftentimes a kiddo could have PDA, it gets misdiagnosed as autism. A lot of the times with that, it's those social cues and those social interactions and deficits, and that's why it gets linked more to autism, versus a kiddo maybe with CD or ODD. They can be more socially aware and almost mask the behaviors more in those social situations, versus kids with PDA may not as much. So as the slide says, some of the key features of PDA are going to be that the kiddo resists and avoids the ordinary demands of life. So that could be something as simple as getting up, getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, and going about your day. One day you can do it just fine, and then the next day, just the thought of having to get up and brush your teeth produces so much anxiety that you just avoid it altogether, and you just lay in bed all day and you just do nothing. That's one example. Please also note too, I'm using the phrase kiddos and talking about kids because that's the population I work with, but adults have this as well, teenagers. It affects across the lifespan. It isn't just specific to children. Another key feature of the PDA is that the kiddos use social strategies as part of the avoidance. These kids are often so smart. If you look at them academically, they're typically on par with where they should be or even ahead academically. So they are very smart, intelligent kiddos, and they are able to use those social strategies to get out of demands. So for example, if we go back to the toothbrushing, could be, oh, I can't brush my teeth today. My tooth is really hurting. I need to take a break from it. And they'll try to use the sympathy, the empathy of others to avoid those demands. But the main thing to always keep in mind with PDA is that a lot of the research shows is that it stems from anxiety, the anxiety they feel about doing these demands, and then the avoidance is the behavior we see. Just to what extent do we go to avoid these behaviors is, what we're going to focus on. Another thing is that these kids can appear super sociable on the surface, but as you pay more attention, get to know them better, you start to see those deficits. So oftentimes with the PDA kiddos, if you're called in for maybe a one-time, one-off observation of them, you go in the class, watch them for 3 hours, and you leave thinking, these teachers don't know what they're talking about. The parents are wrong. This kid's fine. He sat there, did all his work, answered. He was polite. He was charming. He said hi and bye. He did the transitions just fine. That's a lot of times with these PDA kiddos is that they are capable of going about their daily routine just fine, and they do it at times. It's just when that anxiety starts to build, maybe a stressful situation happened. It could be that they woke up in the morning feeling a little bit cold. That kind of ups the ante. Then they go downstairs. Their favorite cereal was all gone. So that gets it to that next point. And that stress just slowly builds into the point that it explodes. So the thing we can see is experience excessive mood swings and impulsivity. So with that, these kiddos, kind of with the, on one of the previous slides I talked about that impulse control, they may lack impulse control. I know a couple kiddos with PDA that they will throw a piece of paper or they will hit someone, and then you can immediately see it on their face, that immediate regret and that shock almost is, oh my gosh, I just did that. But that's where that impulse control comes in those excessive mood swings. They can be happy, fine 1 minute, and then like a light switch, just not the next minute, and then almost just as quickly come back to being happy again. Another thing can be some obsessive behavior. A lot of the times with PDA kiddos, they may link and be obsessed. I'm not a fan of using that word, but be very hyper-focused on other people, whether that's a favorite character from an anime show or from Roblox, or maybe a favorite teacher, a therapist, could be a family member. And they're just very fixated on that person. And when that person's around, their behavior may be one way, but be completely different when that person's not around. Another key factor, which this one is not always present, but typically is present more than not, is that the kiddos can appear very comfortable in role play and pretend situations. I know a couple PDA kiddos who, they are so creative. And when they're in the zone, they are in the zone. But even in the zone, they're still very much controlling and have to be in charge of exactly the way the play is and exactly how the rules of the game go. Just that where it may differ a little bit from autism in the fact that a lot of our kiddos on the autism spectrum may struggle more with that role play and that pretend play, whereas the PDA kids, they typically have that skill set. And so with PDA, as I mentioned previously, as that stress builds, as that anxiety builds up within the kiddo, their ability to cope and handle those normal demands decreases drastically. That's why we can see that sometimes they go about their normal daily routine just fine, and then sometimes it is not fine. Even to the extent that it could be something they love doing, let's say going to one of the local trampoline parks, their favorite activity, they worked all week long, really want to go, and then it came to the day of, and for whatever reason they just wake up in the morning and the amount of anxiety they're feeling, they don't want to go to the trampoline park now, and they engage in behaviors to avoid it. As we know, it's hard to express that feeling of anxiety. Often, especially as a kid, they don't know what anxiety is. And so instead of just stating like, I can't do this today, that's when we'll see those behaviors or those avoidant type behaviors. So maybe that Timmy knows if he goes and hits his sister, it doesn't matter if he's earned the trampoline park, he's not allowed to go because he aggressed on his sister. So in that instance, if he's trying to avoid going to the trampoline park, he's going to go and hit his sister. So as the parent, you're watching this happen, like, why is this happening? He worked so hard all week. He wants a trampoline park. He loves a trampoline park. But with those PDA kiddos, just sometimes, even those enjoyable things, it is a type of demand. And a lot of this is kind of happening internally in the kiddo. But what we see is the external behaviors that they engage in, and those are going to be to avoid that situation. With that, we can also see a lot of those masking of behaviors. So it could be that the kiddos know, like, hey, when Miss Tina walks in the room, I know I better sit up straight and I better listen. She's not in there. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Or it could be the opposite fact that, Miss Tina, she is my favorite. I love her. Oh, but now she just gave another kiddo attention, not me. I'm going to do everything I can to get her to attend to me. And that goes back to that control, and that especially kind of the previous slide, how one of the key factors of PDA is that obsession with other people or a certain character. Oftentimes it's that need to control that person as well. So if that person is laughing along, playing, doing what the kiddo wants, typically life is great and it goes fine. But when that person says no, or they don't do what the kiddo wants, the kiddo's no longer in control. At that point is when we typically see a lot of those behaviors. Another kind of phrase to explain PDA is going to be that intolerance of uncertainty. As we know in general in life, when you walk into situations that you don't really know what to expect, you're unsure of what the expectations are, what the societal rule for that situation is, it causes anxiety in most people. Social anxiety is a very real thing. It seems to be getting bigger by the day. Especially with our PDA kiddos, that's how they often feel all the time. So when they get into those events that are uncertain, maybe it's a new teacher in the classroom, a new peers in the classroom, a change of routine, you walk in, all of a sudden all the desks are changed. That uncertainty immediately spikes the anxiety, immediately makes the kid want to avoid the situation. How do I avoid the situation? I know if I just run out of the classroom, guess what? I'm not in the classroom anymore. I successfully avoided that situation. So that's always something to keep in mind with our PDA kiddos, is that what is their goal in mind? So in that example, that kiddo just wanted to get out of that classroom. He could not handle the uncertainty of the change that happened, of not knowing what to expect, which all goes back to that control. If you know what to expect, you kind of have more control of the situation. You feel more in control, versus if you don't, you're not in control at all. So always to keep in mind that, no, this kiddo isn't just running down the hallway to cause a scene or try to get attention. This kid is just running down the hallway to not be in the classroom. That's always something to keep in mind. So on this slide, I'm going to dive a bit more into control. As you've heard throughout the presentation, I mentioned control a lot, especially with our defiant kiddos. Control is the function of the defiant behavior. As far as ABA is concerned, though, we only talk about the 4 main functions. We have attention, escape avoidance, access to tangibles, and that sensory automatic stimulation. But control is also a very important function. It's typically a combination of both escape and attention at the same time, which as far as ABA is concerned, makes it extremely hard to try to intervene on, because typically the intervention for attention is the complete opposite as an intervention for escape. And with control, people have tried to do the research on it, but it's so hard to do it consistently, reliably, with integrity, because control is such an internal sensation that it's hard to have a direct and observable behavior that we can measure consistently over time across different staff, across different environments. And that's what we need in ABA to be able to say, like, yes, this is the function. So that's why control is always kind of that like 5th element that we talk about, but it's just so hard to really capture and treat and define and to collect data on. But as we know, with kids in general, control is such a big part of life. Adults as well, control is such a big part of life. Kids often don't get control, especially with our kiddos on the autism spectrum and then PDA specifically. Control is what these kids want. If they have the control of the situation, it typically goes great. When they don't have control is when we see those behaviors. So that may be, like, let's say we have a bunch of kids playing on the playground. We have little Timmy over there who he's leading the gang right now. They're playing a version of Ghostbusters. Everyone's having fun, laughing. It goes great. He has a really creative twist to it. All the kids love it. They jump on board. It's a beautiful 20-minute long interaction. Everyone walks inside happy. It was a great day. Then the next day we go out to recess. Little Timmy wants to do the Ghostbusters game again. So the kids start to play, but now we have little Annie come along and she wants to add her input to the game. Ho, ho, ho. No, that's not Timmy's choice. At that point, we may see a ton of behaviors typically, because that's when the control gets taken away. And with our PDA kiddos, that is a big struggle for them. That's why oftentimes we can see sometimes they play great with kids, but then sometimes it does not go well. So that's why we work a lot on them relinquishing that control, accepting the choices of others. And if they don't accept the choice of others, teach them a more appropriate way to then avoid that play situation. So let's say Timmy's leading the gang, they're playing Ghostbusters, it's going great. Annie comes up and says that she wants to now add in the princess element to the game. All the kids start to do that. At that point, Timmy goes up and pushes Annie over to try to get her away and out of the game. So a better, more appropriate thing to do would be to teach Timmy, hey, use your words, say, I don't want to play it that way, I want to play it my way. Or, hey, bud, when it comes down to it, if that's what all the kids want to play, it's your choice, bud. You can either join them or you can choose to play something else. But that in and of itself is a super hard skill for a lot of these PDA kiddos to have. And it will take time to work on and to teach and to eventually gain success with that skill. So now for this side and the next couple, I'm just going to go over some tips and tricks that I found of things that work and don't work when interacting with defiant kiddos. So these could be kiddos who do have the diagnosis of PDA, may just have a diagnosis of autism. It could be a diagnosis of ODD. Just some tips and tricks that throughout my 7.5 years as a BCBA that I found to be helpful, also paired with what I've read from research and other people who've interacted with our kiddos. One thing to always keep in mind, these kids are so smart typically. As I said before, academically, a lot of our defiant kiddos, they are typically on par with where they should be or even advanced academically. And so something you want to avoid doing is making an empty threat or an empty promise. You know, letting little Johnny know, oh, if you hit again, Christmas is gone, you're not getting Christmas. Unless you're really going to actually fully take Christmas away from Johnny, don't say that. So especially with our defiant kiddos, the more empty threats you make, you just lose all authority in that case, and they're not going to believe anything you say. And that's going to be that much harder to eventually gain compliance and get that stimulus control over the kiddo down the road. At the same time, you don't want to make an empty promise and let, little Johnny know, hey, bud, if you can make it through the entire week at school, you don't get kicked out once, I don't get any bad reports home, we're going to Disney this weekend. Do not say that unless you fully intend to actually take them to Disney that weekend. Because especially with, kids in general, but our defiant ones, if they've actively earned something, really worked for it, and they truly did earn it and they don't get it, that just lost all motivation for that kiddo now. And you can expect the next couple weeks are probably not going to be too fun. Like I said, they are smart. Don't make those empty threats and don't make empty promises. I fully understand it can be extremely frustrating to work with these kiddos. And in the moment, maybe making a statement like that, it's kind of that shock value. It works. But you got to keep in mind, these kids will remember, and you just don't say it unless you can actually follow through with it in that case. Another thing is try not to get into arguments with these kiddos. Believe me, I've seen it. They can push buttons like no other. It is like a magic trick. They can just know the right way of looking at someone or the right wording to say or the tone of voice to use that can just get under someone's skin like no other. And what they want is that reaction. So you have to always keep in mind, game face on, don't get into an argument, especially if you're an adult with a kiddo. There's absolutely no point to it. Even if the kid is blatantly telling you that you're wrong to your face, you just got to walk away in those moments. Because as soon as you engage, as soon as you get into that argument or try to reason with them, logic with them, nope, they just got the reaction out of you. Essentially, the kid wins and you've lost. So a lot of times, even if a kid is being extremely disrespectful or, mouthing off, you just have to be able to turn your back and walk away. And then when they are being appropriate again, that's when you then jump back in and have that conversation with them. With this, a big thing is going to be pick and choose your battles. You always want to keep what is our end goal in mind. So let's say we have little, Johnny in the classroom. We know we have this test coming up. We just need this kid to finish his test. So coming up to the test, who cares if he uses a pen or if he uses a pencil or a special mechanical pencil that only the teacher's supposed to use? If that's what it takes to help Johnny get through that test, gotta just kind of let it go. Definitely nitpicking the defiant kids' behaviors, not a good idea. And it can be hard too, being a teacher, for example, in a classroom and having expectations for everyone that we got to stay in our seat. We have our resting hands on the table. Well, with our defiant kiddos, as long as they're in the vicinity of their chair, that may be what we get out of them. You don't want to try to nitpick, because the more you nitpick, typically the more they dig in, the more the defiance kicks in, and we see the anxiety, and then we see the behaviors and the explosion, and it's game over at that point. Oftentimes, too, our defiant kiddos, they typically, from my experience, they don't like that physical contact. They don't like being touched. Like, they may love getting a hug if it's on their terms, but like any type of a physical prompt, avoid it at all costs, because at that point, as soon as you put hands on them, you've immediately escalated the situation. Oftentimes, too, with our defiant kiddos, if you can catch the behaviors early on, sometimes you can kind of reason with them and just let them know, like, hey, bud, listen, I want a pizza for lunch today, too. We called, the place is closed. Like, there's truly nothing we can do, man. I'm sorry. I'm mad, too. And show them, talk about those things, and try to de-escalate the behaviors before they start to intensify. That being said, once the behaviors do reach that point of intensifying, that's not the time to have a conversation. If you want the conversation, you either got to do it early on and catch them, do it before the behavior, or once they're fully de-escalated and calm, have the conversation then. But during, it's not going to work, and it's just going to end up frustrating everyone in the situation more. So continuing what I was talking about on the last slide, it's important to know when to talk and when to give space when interacting with our defiant kiddos. I call it a dance. Sometimes they'll make a statement, I'll respond. Sometimes they'll make a statement, I'll ignore it. Sometimes they'll make a statement and I'll redirect it in a way. And it could vary. They could say the same statements, but based on the context, what's going on, my reaction is going to vary. So definitely you need to have rapport with these kiddos. You need to know them. Take the time to get to know them. I mean, they're often really cool kids. You just give them that opportunity. And once you know kind of how they work and how they're functioning in the moment, that's when you can better know for yourself when is the time to talk and when's the time to give them space. As I said previously, when they're escalated in behavior, I mean, this is going to be not for the defiant kids, any kid or even adult in general. When someone's escalated in the heat of the moment, that is never the time to have the conversation. You have to wait till we get de-escalated in order to have that conversation. A phrase I really like that Dr. Greg Hanley, he's up in Boston, he uses all the time, is that we want the kiddos to be happy, relaxed, and engaged. When you're in that state of being happy, you're relaxed, you're engaged, that's when you're more receptive to learning, to hearing, to being taught things, versus when you're mad, when you're upset, when you're frustrated, when you're feeling anxious. That's not the time that you're going to be receptive to receiving new information and trying to learn some new things. But obviously, with all things being said, safety will always trump all. If behaviors get to the point that like there is truly the child may hurt themselves, someone else, or seriously damage property, all bets are off at that point. You do what it takes to keep the kid and everyone else safe. And so one last note on the different interventions, specific to our defiant PDA type kiddos, maybe diagnosed ODD, ASD, ADHD, whatever diagnosis they have, that just display those defiant behaviors. From my experience, oftentimes when you start a new intervention, it works so well the first couple weeks. Life is great. We implement a new token system. It's working so good. And then one day it just stops and it loses all effectiveness. That is a very common trend when we try those various ABA interventions with those defiant kiddos. Even the research now is showing with PDA specifically that those traditional ABA, those behavior management strategies that we often use for most kiddos, they don't work for those PDA kids. I think that really boils down to the fact, as I saw on a previous slide, with ABA, the control is that attention and escape at the same time. ABA functions, we target one or the other, but they're opposite approaches. So typically we may be hitting half of the function that the kiddo is getting at, but we're missing that other half. So that's why, hey, an intervention may work to start, but then it loses its effectiveness. So that's always something to keep in mind. And as a practitioner, it makes it more challenging to work with these kiddos, but just so much opportunity. And when you do find something that works, it is really great and awesome. So the end goal that we always want, especially with our defiant kiddos, is to teach them first self-awareness and then into self-regulation. So first, we need to teach the kiddo to be aware of what behaviors they're engaging in at the time. I'm at a point with one of my kiddos, for example, that we're just working on each instance that I see, him engage in aggression or property destruction, a threatening statement. I'm immediately calling it out. So that way I know he knows what those behaviors are to make him more self-aware of it. We may have a kiddo who's already kind of past that point. They know exactly what they're doing. They can rattle off to you exactly, hey, if you do this, I'm going to go off. If you tell me I have to clean up, okay, I'm going to go. I'll take my book. I'll throw it across the classroom, run to the bathroom, turn the water on, throw it all over the sink. Then you have to take me down out of the classroom. And I know exactly what's going to happen. So definitely with our defiant kiddos, we want them to get to that point of self-awareness, to know the rules, know the contingencies. And then once we get to that point, that's when we can teach that self-regulation. It's like, okay, well, if you choose to go and throw water to destroy the classroom, that's right, we do get removed. That's also you choosing then to miss out on the next break, and then also choosing to have to clean that up at a later point in time. So hey, your choice, my friend, but what's going to happen is what's going to happen. So that a lot of things that we'll teach is recognizing the size of the problem. Oftentimes our defiant kiddos, they tend to overblow situations. So a lot of things I'll work on with kiddos is recognizing what is the size of the problem. Is it a little problem or is it truly a big problem? Hey, someone walked past you, they didn't even touch your desk, but just the motion of them walking past blew your paper off. That's a little problem. That's nothing. Just pick it up, go on with life, man. If someone walks past your desk, intentionally swipes your papers off, yeah, that is a bigger problem. That is something to draw the attention of to the teacher. Yes, that kid should then go and have to pick it up. Let's say it's to the point that a hurricane goes through and destroys your house. Yes, that is a big problem. That warrants a big reaction. You are fully within every right to have a full-on meltdown tantrum at that point. So that's something that we really try to teach, is that based on the size of the problem, it does warrant different reactions, and that there is some situations that fully is expected that yes, you are going to lose control if that happens. Anyone would in that case. But little minor things, that's when we got to really work on that control and find those appropriate coping skills and the coping mechanisms to handle those better. And I just wanted to end on this note, that when we're working with these defiant kids specifically, like I said, regardless of what diagnosis they have, there's kids who display those defiant behaviors. Having rapport is so important. Build that relationship with the kiddo. The better you know them, they know you. That gets into knowing what to expect. So the kiddos that I have good rapport with, they know when I walk in the classroom exactly what my expectation is going to be. They know if they do something, what my reaction is going to be. And that in and of itself gives them that sense of comfort and control when they have that rapport with someone and they know what to expect. It's when you have someone who maybe always changes their reactions or who is inconsistent, and then you don't know what to expect, so you feel out of control, and that automatically, maybe just seeing that person ups your stress level, ups the anxiety, and that's when we start to see these behaviors. So definitely building rapport, taking the time to do that is important. That being said, specifically to parents now, you cannot both be the parent and the therapist at the same time. I can definitely appreciate the effort and the trying to do it, but it's going to be near impossible to try to both be a parent to your child and also try to be the therapist who can work with them and redirect their behaviors. Even just the mental strain on you as the parent alone trying to do both of that is unrealistic and not fair. So that's why please ask for help. There is so much resources out there. It's definitely, I can understand the embarrassment factor to it and kind of that shame. Oh, I'm a bad parent. I caused my child to do this. I'm telling you, you're not a bad parent. You are not the reason your child is acting like this. Please ask for help. And luckily, as time is going on, there is less stigma around the behaviors, around the defiance. The fact that PDA is now an actual diagnosis that is getting given to children just shows that it happens so much and that you are not alone by any means. But please do ask for help, because trying to do it all yourself, it's not going to work, and it's just going to hurt your own mental health as well as not help your kiddo at that point. As I said, some different interventions that are common with those defined behaviors. You have the talk therapy, the different family therapies, the CBT, ABA is one, medication management. It's just going to be whatever is best for you and your family and your kiddo. Talk with your pediatrician and just figure out a game plan that works. But as I said, parents, please ask for help when needed. Consult your teachers. Don't feel embarrassed or ashamed of your kids' behaviors. Believe me, if it was only something that was truly a parent's fault, we'd only see we wouldn't see these behaviors at school. We wouldn't see them out in public. But we do oftentimes. We see them across environments. So that tells us it's not any one individual that is causing these behaviors. It's something internal inside the kiddo that we can work on. There is interventions that help. There is always hope. So please just never give up. And like I said, ask for help as needed. And so to wrap things up, as always with our parent trainings, we have our 3 questions at the end. So parents, if you just answer the questions, submit them to your location, whether that's Palm Bay or Rockledge, and then you can get credit for attending the parent training. So the first question is going to be, what is the cause of ODD, CD, or PDA? Second, does PDA fall on the autism spectrum? Third, does ODD or CD fall under the autism spectrum? So I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or to your BCBA. We are all a team here. We are here to help. And like I said, the defiant kids, they can be extremely frustrating, but personally, they're my favorite kids to work with. They are great. They are funny. They're smart. They're creative. And there is always hope. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.